On October 7th, I and hundreds of thousands of others packed our bags, kissed our families goodbye, and went off to wherever it was and to whatever duty it was we went off to. It was a day defined by the unknown, by pieces of information, by glimpses of horror, by a fog of war so thick no one could see, even as we ventured forth into that bright day. Israel on October 7th faced one of the largest and most terrible catastrophes in its history. The true scale of the slaughter and the collapse of the Southern Command was initially unknown. This created a strategic vacuum at the highest levels. The entire country was immediately focused, not just on trying to get a handle on the situation in and around Gaza, it was also trying to assess the damage that was made to the entire system of Israel's defense. The fundamental truth that set in quite quickly was that the enemy's success was not simply tactical, but systemic and strategic, and that Israel's failure in this regard could easily become the catalyst for every other hostile enemy actor to realize that we were wounded, to realize that this might be the time. And this was not a mistake, for it was exactly what Sinwar planned. Welcome to Causality. My name is Sharon Bar Eretz. I'm a major in the idea of reserves. I have a background in international relations, political science, and sociology. Here we take a look behind the scenes and see not just what happened, but why things happened the way they did. The news reports the symptoms. We provide the diagnosis. This is the opening episode of our second series in our large anthology covering the more than 2-year war that Israel has faced. The first series dealt with the prelude to October 7th, the intelligence failures, the defense failures, and why that happened. There, it was shown that we had built a security doctrine that was around the idea that Hamas was contained, manageable, and small. The moment that that small threat successfully breached the line, it did more than just inflict tactical damage. It exposed the structural flaw in our strategic architecture. It immediately opened the question to the other, larger, managed threats. We were wounded. Perhaps we were overextended. And we had one simple mission: to make sure that everyone around us knew a simple fact: now is not the time to mess with us. Here, in Series 2, we look at the opening phase of the war, not by detailing any single front, but by analyzing the systematic shock, how we rebuilt, and how we unified the nation on a singular purpose: to defeat our enemies, wherever they may be. This episode is designed to survey that multifront landscape that Israel faced immediately following the shock. This isn't about the idea's response. That comes in further episodes. This is about defining the impossible puzzle that faced decision makers in those opening 48-72 hours. This is to understand how, at that moment, Israel was an injured lion, and it knew that the hyenas were circling in. Without further ado, I will go through the different enemies that Israel saw when it looked up and surveyed the horizon. This video might serve as an overview, not only for this stage of war, but for the entire war that was to come. First, of course, there was Gaza. Gaza exploded on that day, and it was the clear and present danger that Israel had to deal with, and it knew that now it had to deal with it once and for all. But beyond Gaza, the most immediate and pressing threat would be Hezbollah. They were by far the biggest and most prepared military threat to Israel in the region, functioning as the primary army for Iran's so-called axis of resistance. We knew that they had similar, far more ambitious plans to infiltrate, attack, and conquer the north. But Hezbollah wasn't simply a terrorist group. They also functionally controlled the state of Lebanon through various political parties and power. The critical question was immediate and terrifying. Were they going to exploit us at our most vulnerable and force a second, large, perhaps catastrophic front? Was that the plan all along? Was the Gazan attack coordinated with Lebanon? At this point, we did not know. But Hezbollah wasn't alone in the north. To its side, there was the Syrian flank. The Assad regime, though politically and militarily weakened by over a decade of civil war, had recently emerged, which, by most accounts, people considered victory. They had reasserted control over much of the country, and this included the border area with the Golan Heights. This was a deeply unpredictable flank, and it was tied directly to Iran. But it wasn't only the regime itself. The area hosted a kaleidoscope of different actors: Hezbollah, various militias, even Palestinian groups. All of them were either indirectly or directly tied with Tehran. Together with Hezbollah, this made the entire north a critical potential area of conflict. But besides for the north, there was a miscellany of other Iranian proxies in the wider region. The Houthis, for example, who I feel safe saying were not really prominent on any Israeli decision-makers' radar before October 7th, quickly emerged as a threat to both Israeli and broader Western supply lines as they controlled a Red Sea choke point. They also took to the habit of lobbing missiles at Israel itself. Similarly, there was another question mark: the Iranian militias in Iraq, who had their own drone and missile capabilities, and they also fielded large, organized armies who were essentially at Iran's beck and call. And of course, there was Iran itself. Iran was not just the financial backer, but was the architect of this entire system, which had all of these proxies arrayed against Israel. And they had also built up a large rocket capability of their own. We did not know where the command came to execute October 7th at that point. We did not know if the plan was utilizing all of those proxies to simultaneously attack us in full force. We did not know if they would bring their own ballistic missiles to bear on us in the hours or days to come. Those were the external threats to Israel at that time. And then we had the internal threats. In Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, a large question mark hovered over the area. Was it on the verge of explosion? Would a new intifada erupt? Would that create chaos? And if it did, how many troops would be needed to be diverted there? Who would attack? Would it be organized? Would it be sporadic? These were open questions on that day. But this wasn't the only internal threat. Another fear that wafted over the country stemmed partly from the fact that we were only 2 years removed from a different operation, Shomer HaChomot. During Shomer HaChomot, there was wide-scale civilian disturbances from the Israeli Arab population. And this recent history contributed to profound fears that perhaps the internal Israeli Arab communities might have been turned by Hamas into a fifth column, opening up multiple fronts that had no border, that were spread around the entire country. Now, this was part of Sinwar's plan, actually. But a crucial point needs to be underscored, that to the relief of everyone, Arab and Jew alike, quiet was maintained. And that sort of internal strife, which if it had occurred at that moment in Israeli history, would have completely changed the makeup and mosaic of Israeli society. Everyone was relieved that this didn't occur. And these were only the most clear threats. It also had to be taken into account that these were unprecedented times. There was always the chance that long-held grudges of other Arab states or only their populace would also erupt anew, would join the fray. Again, thankfully, this didn't happen. At the highest levels, everyone had to do the impossible existential strategic calculation with a system compromised. Every decision was a desperate wager against the unknown. Who would attack? When would they attack? And how would this attack proceed? What would be the target? To what end? It was only much later that we learned that Hamas under Sinwar did not fully coordinate the timing of the attack of October 7th, neither with Hezbollah or with Iran. But there are strong indications that this type of attack and some of the initial planning was done with Iran's guiding hand. However, Sinwar executed the plan based on his own grand assumption that once Hamas had attacked, had succeeded, had shattered the illusion of Israeli invincibility, it would induce every other hostile actor, from Iran to Hezbollah, from the West Bank Palestinians to the Israeli Arabs, that now was the time, and they would all pile in. This strategic calculus made by Sinwar was one of the main reasons for October 7th. The sum of all of these various threats placed on Israel the immediate requirement to simultaneously defend against all the interlocking fronts with its limited equipment, limited manpower, and limited time. It can never be known for certain, but I believe that a lot of these actions taken by Israel during those opening hours, days, and weeks contributed to the success that came later on. It succeeded in sending that message. It prevented the hyenas from piling in. This series in the anthology will cover those few decisive days and weeks where Israel delivered that message to show all the circling enemies through actions, through rhetoric, through visible force deployments, and showing that it had the willingness and will to fight to no end. The lion may have been injured, but everyone had to learn the lesson that this was not the time to mess with us. Join us next week where we go through the line between chaos and order and how we went from order to chaos and back to a new, harder order. Again, this is causality. The news reports the symptoms. We provide the diagnosis. Like, subscribe, and share with friends and family. Until next time, take care.